And there was one weekend where we had a trip to DC. We heard again, so like that customer emailed us before we went and said, hey, we're interested in like Chinese and Russian. We spun up a Mandarin model over the weekend and then demoed that on that next week. And that was the first time where somebody actually perked up a little bit. And like when we showed them, it was just one really like, it was still a half working demo, but we got something. And then we kind of followed that thread a little bit further, understood kind of like some more key components of the products. And then we had our first meeting where somebody actually wanted to use it on a deployment. We pitched it and it wasn't, like nobody getting back to us. It was like, hey, I'm like in a certain country right now. I need access to this now. Like, how do I buy this from you? And that was sort of knew that we had product market fit.
Maybe just to get started and to give some of the people context about Vannevar itself and both of you. Nini, you used to work in the national intelligence community. Brett, you spent time at Incutel, which is a venture arm associated with the CIA. It'd be great to know, with those backgrounds in mind, how you guys met, what you learned in your previous jobs that influenced what you've built at Vannevar so far, and what made you both feel like now was the right time to jump into this founder journey and start the company.
Yeah, Niki, maybe I'll start with my previous experience that got me excited about starting Vannevar and meeting Brett, and then Brett can take it away on why the moment was right to start Vannevar. So I think for me, so I started my career in the intel community, really had the privilege of serving as a counterterrorism officer for 7 years. And the story of Vannevar for me starts in 2013 when I was deployed in Afghanistan. It was my first job out of college, out of a small team going after these really high value counterterrorism targets. And we had an embedded software engineer who would build applications for us to get after this really important mission. And we actually had great technology. And I saw for the first time that technology can be so important to these national security missions. And then every other job I had in the intel community, that was not the case. It was not broadly available to me and my colleagues as we went after, other important missions, whether that was trying to rescue, U.S. hostages out of Syria or respond after ISIS captured Mosul. We just didn't have access to great technology. And yet, I think I knew intuitively that there were, obviously great private sector companies out there building great commercial technology. They weren't building it for government. And seeing that gap, I ended up requesting to go work in our IT procurement office for a bit of time just to try and understand where this gap was coming from. And I saw that a lot of it was because of the way that we procured software, which was from a limited number of prime contractors, none of whom were software companies. And so that was my perspective when I left government in 2018 and I came out to Silicon Valley and I was starting grad school. And I met Brett. We were on campus together, and I was the only former intel officer in our business school class, and Brett was the only former defense investor. So everyone thought that we should meet. In the first week, we went on a walk and just talked about first, like the obsession I think we both share for the really important missions that we worked on, and the really great people we both worked with in the intel community. And then the second being this gap that we had both seen that we really, really wanted to be part of solving. So I'll let Brett pick it up from there on his story coming into Vannevar.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, on my side, the journey for me started with working with the Counterterrorism Mission Center at Incutel back in the 2016 and 2008 time horizon, which was the counter Islamic State days. And very similar to Nini, is the same problem where there was one particular mission that was really important. There were a lot of targeters on the CIA side that were really smart and working really hard, but the main tool they had to do their job that was built by a defense prime broke, and nobody cared. The prime didn't care. The program manager at CIA didn't care. And as a result, people were having to work like 80 to 100-hour weeks, and the mission results were not what they should have been, given kind of what that problem set was. That contract was also, close to $100 million a year. And just seeing just the enormous gap between the talent for that defense prime on the engineering side and what existed in Silicon Valley, and the importance of the mission, and also the size of the contract, started to drive me a little bit crazy. And I saw that different versions of that a couple more times at In-Q-Tel. And the thesis for us was just, hey, there are really smart software engineers in the United States. There are these problems that are very well funded by the U.S. government. We should just solve them. We can like bring these people together and solve these problems.
Okay, so today the company is focused on the China and Russia missions, and your largest product, or the biggest revenue driver, is a product called Decrypt. But that wasn't always the case. The company started with a different focus, and you kind of found your way to where you are today. And I think this could be helpful for a lot of people listening that are maybe thinking about starting defense tech companies, about kind of what it takes to find product market fit. So, and it'd also be good to hear more about just like exactly what Vannevar does. So can you guys maybe talk about the journey, like what the original product was and how you found your kind of like calling to what the product is today, and tell the audience a little bit about what that product does today?
We had pretty much no idea what we were doing from a product development standpoint in the beginning. The first mission problem that we wanted to work on was Arabic optical character recognition. So just extracting Arabic text out of image files. This was sounds small, but was a really important problem at the time for some of the things that Nini and I worked on. And we had this, half-baked vision of, okay, like maybe we're going to build this, this API that, we sort of bulk process Arabic images, spit out outputs, and then on the government side, they'll buy it, they'll integrate it into their workflow, and everything will be great. A lot of problems with that assumption. The way that we went about development was we built the initial service. We built a little command line interface that we demoed to people of, here's an Arabic image, out pops the Arabic text transcribed, and then we started demoing to people, and we started trying to sell to people. We did a bunch of these meetings. Nobody was interested. Nobody wanted to buy. We didn't know if it was because we were bad at sales or if the product wasn't good. What we ended up doing was we just kept adding more features. So, okay, nobody wants to buy our command line, OCR, whatever tool. Let's add translation. And so then I went from like Arabic image to English, searchable text at the end. And then it was, all right, let's build a UI around this. And then it was, let's build NER, entity extraction on this. Then it was, let's build like a search service on this. And so we made the mistake of layering feature upon feature upon feature on an idea that we were not getting pull on. The mistake being like, oh, if this were more feature complete, surely, this would be great. The big change for us happened was as we were kind of, I don't even know, 40 or 50 sales meetings deep, we started to hear a common thread around, all right, maybe not for Arabic, but hey, do you guys have this for Chinese or Russian? That would be really interesting to us. And there was one weekend where we had a trip to DC. We heard again, so like that customer emailed us before we went and said, hey, we're interested in like Chinese and Russian. We spun up a Mandarin model over the weekend and then demoed that on that next week. And that was the first time where somebody actually perked up a little bit. And like when we showed them, it was just one really it was still a half working demo, but we got something. And then we kind of followed that thread a little bit further and a little bit further, understood kind of like some more key components of the product. And then we had our first meeting where somebody actually wanted to use it on a deployment. We pitched it and it wasn't, nobody getting back to us. It was like, hey, I'm like in a certain country right now. I need access to this now. Like, how do I buy this from you? And that was sort of knew that we had product market fit. So that's not the way you should do product development in defense. It's like the opposite. That's the way you should do. You should not kind of like keep layering on feature upon feature if you're not kind of clicking on the core of a problem. Like in retrospect, for people listening, like an easier way to do this is like, hey, we didn't even need to train an OCR model. Like we could have probably just used it. OCR at that point was like somewhat of a solved problem. Maybe instead of spending months on the machine learning engineering side, maybe we could have gotten that answered like in a day. And so these are kind of product development lessons that we learned.
Just to add maybe like why we weren't getting any pull on Arabic OCR and why we got immediate pull on even just the first step of exploiting other languages that were higher value. I think this turned into a principle for us as a company, which is you have to be working on a top 3 national security problem. And at the time, the U.S. had made, they'd been working for 2 decades plus on counterterrorism and counterinsurgency, and we built a lot of our capabilities around those 2 missions. And in 2020, which is when we released the product that Brett's describing, fully featured, having spent like 6 months on it with very little user feedback. It was at a time when we were drawing down in the Middle East, and the entire government was really pivoting to thinking about how are we going to compete with our strategic competitors, China and Russia. And so that's why we're getting those questions from users who are saying, I'm being told to focus on this new mission and I have no capabilities to do it. And so that meant when even our first approach at going after that problem set, there was so much pull from these user groups, high value user groups doing really important missions because they had no capability. And so our initial kind of very minimal MVP was better than nothing, essentially. And that told us if you are working on one of these top 3 national security problems, you can build a big company around that. You can build a number of products, which we've done since then. But it's really informed how we think about the problems that we choose to go after now, having seen what it looks like to work on a problem that's low value and you're not finding product market fit.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and then on the decrypt side, I can't talk too specifically about all the things we're doing, but the key components of decrypt were, the first was, hey, actually our national security, national asset level collection for, say, China and Russia aren't as strong as they are, or as they were on the counterterrorism fight, where we had immediate access to the physical locations that we needed to access. You could fly a plane or a UAV overhead, you had people on the ground, you have really good collection. For like China and Russia, you have a much weaker collection apparatus. And so the first chunk of decrypt was actually about collecting data. What type of data can we collect that has national security value that, we are ourselves able to get access to through either like creative technical means or other means that we can then provide to some of the analysts that are working on these problems. Once you solve the collection problem, that's great, but now you have a bunch of text, imagery, video, and audio data to process. And so then it turns into more of like, how do you process those different types of data to get analysts to specific answers more quickly? And since Decrypt, we've built several software products and one hardware product, but the common theme between those products is actually usually the same 2 things. It's what kind of unique data can we either create ourselves or can we collect? And then how do we uniquely process that mission, that like critical mission data? Those are sort of the 2 common themes across the products that we build.
Got it. And if I remember correctly, like this, I'm going to call it a pivot, even though it wasn't a full company pivot, but this new change in strategy and mission orientation happened between the Series A and the Series B, right?
It was right before the Series A was when we started to get conviction. And like what happened was we kind of got our first it was like a $25,000 deployment. That was like our first actual deal with one user who was using our product. But that user's work was going right up to the commander of a really important group focused on like the mission problem in Asia. And within the first couple months, we had a mission win that informed like an operational decision for that group. And this, again, we only have like 25,000 in revenue at that point. But at that point, it seemed clear to me that we were like that was going to work. It was just a matter of like time and making the product more mature and like a lot of things we had to figure out, but that was like right before the Series A.
Got it. And then by the time that I met you guys, I remember some of the stories that got the Felicis team super excited was you were telling us about getting standing ovations as you were demoing the product to some people. And I was like, oh my gosh, standing ovations. Like I've never heard of a company getting standing ovations before. So that, it's just a testament to how much product pull you were getting and how kind of unique and valuable this was for some of the people that you were selling to.
Yeah. And even for that, it's like I remember the first time that happened because it was so weird. That example was a group of people that were tasked with this really important mission of like in the China and Russia domain. They didn't have the data on the DoD side to solve the problem. And so they were spending all of their time in this windowless room, Google searching things, and then turning that into the briefs that they were making. And so the reason they were so excited, we gave them something that allowed them to actually like do their job in a way that, like actually contributed to the mission. And it was also more fun for them. Yeah.
Great. To the extent that you can, and you can feel free to keep it high level, but can you talk about how maybe some agencies have been using Vannevar, or anything to kind of give the audience a sense of the scale of the company or the rapid adoption of the product? Because I think, Vannevar does an amazing job, and you're starting to really have a bunch of products and a bunch of different agencies, and it's generating a significant amount of revenue and traction. And it would be great to hear just kind of how you guys are building those dominoes, and building on that momentum, whether it's becoming multi-product, multi-agency. I think it would be really helpful for the audience to understand your strategy around that and how it's working.
So in terms of the group deployments, we're deployed across 40 or so groups right now in DoD across most of the major services, not all the services, but most of the major services. So within each service, usually we have multiple deployments. The missions that we work on vary a lot. They can range everything from counter weapons trafficking to identifying and disrupting influence campaigns that are in certain countries, or even like tracking ships, military vessels. The common themes between these problems that we work on is they are usually China or Russia related. We're most successful on the mission side when we kind of like combine products into a bundle that's end-to-end solves a complete mission problem. And so what we're looking at now is kind of looking for those top 3 mission problems that we usually end up deploying multiple capabilities against, and use that as the seed for a deal or program deployment, like the basis of a program deployment. I don't know, Nini, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the category of capabilities, when you talk about like the dominoes, Niki, how did they kind of stack up, has been watching what our users were doing in Decrypt when they first got access to it. I think, as Brett described, like a lot of these users actually said to us, I didn't have a job before I got access to Decrypt. They didn't have any outputs, and they started using Decrypt to do things that are not what Decrypt was designed to do. So as Brett's kind of described, it's an intelligence product. It collects data in contested information environments, surfaces it for analysis. And we saw users doing things like trying to inform operations, like information operations, which is how does my adversary perceive what I'm doing, and how do I shape that perception? And so we realized that there was other categories of missions that users were trying to do in this strategic competition phase with our competitors, ahead of armed conflict, where we're trying to advantage the US and our allies over those competitors. Whole other categories that weren't being covered. And so that's information operations, something that DoD would call like special activities or targeting. And so we've moved into those as our users have sort of pulled us in those directions by showing us that they had no other capability there except Decrypt.
The rapid scale has just been insane, but I think it's even more than that. It's the efficiency at which you guys have done it. Vannevar is a true software company, and so maybe a little bit different than a lot of the defense tech companies that we see today that are super highly CapEx intensive and need to raise a ton of money in order to keep on funding their growth. It gives you a lot of flexibility to kind of go and build products in multiple domains and keep on growing the company. And right now the business is, I think, 150-ish employees with 80 engineers, with plans to scale a bunch over the coming years, especially on the engineering side. So I think it's an incredible place to work. There's a lot of really good problems to work on. And maybe we can just jump into that a little bit and talk about the way that Vannevar approaches R&D, both from like how you think about what projects to work on, but also how you structure your organization in order to move as quickly as possible and build what your customers want and need. So maybe can you talk a little bit about that and how that is different than some of your competitors, and also like what you guys have learned about structuring your R&D organization to build the best defense products that will continue to enable you guys to grow really quickly over the coming years.
Yeah, the most important part of building the right products, whether that's like a new product or iterating on what one you already have deployed, is making sure your product and engineering people are as close to the mission users as humanly possible. And so we spend a lot of time sending engineers to military bases or product people to military bases, oftentimes with people on our mission team to really build domain knowledge on what the problem actually is. And it's not about sitting in like a room or like being at a conference where people are describing the problems to you. It's about watching them do it at their desk, or in the case of the hardware stuff that we're working on, it's like watching them do it on an island in Asia, for example. Like you learn more doing that than it's always ends up being worth it to kind of deploy engineers as close to that as possible. Or the best bets we've made, I should say, have been mission problems where we know them better than other people. And that's usually because of what Nini has described, which is we have a lot of existing customer deployments and we kind of get pulled into different mission problems on those deployments. And so oftentimes we'll start to see common threads across different groups within DoD of groups kind of running into similar problems. And that sort of knowledge allows us to have an advantage in terms of like where we decide to bet R&D time. So I think really important for us is like we make bets on problems, not tech solutions, if that makes sense. So we'll bet on like a mission problem and we start agnostic to what technology might solve. You might have some guesses, but it's kind of what I've seen a lot of companies that try to enter the defense space do is they start technology forward. Oh, we're a computer vision company that does this thing with SAR imagery or satellite imagery or whatever. That's like a feature. That's not how DoD buys. DoD buys like systems that solve complete mission problems. So you need to orient the way you think about product and product development around that. In terms of how we structure the teams, because we're a multi-product company and we're doing both, mostly software, but a little bit of hardware, we split the teams into several really small teams. It could be like 2 to 8 engineers that own an entire product line. And what that means is there's pros and cons to that. What that means on the pro side, what that means is like every person has a completely outsized impact on what that product ends up looking like and the direction that we go from an engineering standpoint. And that can be really exciting for some people. The main things are just focus on the mission problem and get engineers as close to the mission problem as possible. And then that where I think we have like unique mission domain knowledge.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I meet a lot of Vannevar employees and engineers at various defense tech conferences and stuff. And I think the resounding feedback whenever I talk to them is they're having a lot of fun. They feel a great sense of autonomy and ownership. And they're traveling a bunch, meeting with customers, and just feel like they're just building a business within a business. And all of the time they feel like very mission oriented. And it's amazing to see. So I think at least from a very biased perspective, a very high employee NPS at Vannevar. So great job on that. Maybe talk a little bit about like your recruiting process. Like how do you recruit for Vannevar? What kinds of people are you finding that are excelling there? I think that would just be helpful as well, because again, we're talking about, you're 150 now with 80 engineers, and I think the plan is to scale significantly. And so for the people that might be listening and thinking about what it would be like to work at Vannevar and how to get a job there, what are you guys looking for?
Yeah, so the first thing to say here, Niki, we've been talking about how we're trying to build a lot of new products and a lot of new programs. And so there's a lot of opportunity for people to own big chunks of our business end to end, whether that's engineering, like squads of engineers owning an entire product end to end, or on the mission team that I lead. I think about that in terms of growth people owning new programs. But the difference here is that there are very few people that have done that before. So we're not selecting for, on the engineering side, like domain expertise in defense, or on the growth side, people who have like been there, done that, and built programs before, because that's a very, very small pool of people. We believe that we can actually build this from within, and have people come in and take that level of ownership if they have a couple of core qualities that we select for as we're interviewing and getting to know people. The first is this idea of, the ability to operate really autonomously and to take on that level of ownership and really act as an entrepreneur in the business. The second is one that's in our kind of operating principles, and one that we screen for, which is around people who are low ego. We really believe that ego is the enemy of learning in a startup. And if you're doing something for the first time, there's going to be a ton of learning. You're going to be wrong a bunch. And so I've found that the best people for working with our customers and the best people for working with other people on our team are low ego. And the third is just this really pervasive quality across the whole team, which is being pretty obsessed to a rational level with the problems that we're working on and the impact that we can have for our users. Like it's incredibly hard to build new defense products, incredibly hard to build new defense programs. We actually have to partner with people in government that are irrationally excited about what we're doing to go through that gauntlet with us. And we select for people on our team that have that level of irrational excitement about the types of problems we're solving in this strategic competition space with the government.
Yeah, and I think a really good example of a role that like displays those qualities is our forward deployed engineering team. So those engineers do kind of what the name describes, is they deploy forward a lot on military bases with our customers. And what's unique about that engineering role is you actually have full autonomy to build kind of whatever you want. Like there's not a product manager telling you what you should or shouldn't do. You are working with a team on the Vannevar side and with the team on the government side, and you decide what you think the right thing is to build for that mission. One of our most like highest performing new products was actually a prototype that a forward deployed engineer built in Europe in a 3-day customer trip. They heard about a problem. They sat in a coffee shop with like coffee shop Wi-Fi, built a V0 and iterated for 3 days in a row with that customer. That now is like the third most used product across all of the things that we do at Vannevar. And so that's like a really special type of engineer where, yeah, you're looking for people that really thrive in that. Like, I want to work directly with users on really hard mission problems, and I want the autonomy to be able to make decisions on what I think the right thing to build is.
So maybe taking a step back and talking a little bit more about just defense tech broadly and Vannevar's role in it. So the U.S. defense tech budget is in the billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars, and it's growing pretty rapidly, particularly in AI. And so I'm curious what that means for Vannevar in particular as you're thinking about growing the business over the coming years. Like, that seems like a massive tailwind for you. How are you guys feeling that on a day-to-day or quarter-to-quarter basis?
Yeah, I think the tailwind for us is what I described of this moment where the U.S. government is facing and our allies are facing kind of the most complex national security challenge since the Cold War, which is this strategic competition with China and Russia. And we both have the most complex challenge, but also availability of great technologies that have never existed before. And so that means that I think the Defense Department is really open to new ideas, creative ways of bringing great software and great hardware together against large mission problems, which creates a huge opportunity. And I think there are two, if you talk to most mission groups or senior leaders in the national security community right now, there are two things they're working on. One is, how do we prepare for potential armed conflict? Lots of people working on that. Don't know when or if that might happen, but that's pretty well covered. The second area is, how do we compete today? How do we advantage the U.S. and our allies? And that's an area that's not well covered. And that's where Vannevar is building a lot of capability. And so that's the opportunity that we see. And I think it's meant that, a lot of the procurement challenges that people describe when they talk about DoD, they exist, but we're seeing a lot more pull from those two groups I described, mission groups and senior leaders in the DoD, and then a third group, which is program managers who are trying to build these next gen capabilities for mission. We see them pulling us in as a commercial player in this space that's building great technology in a way that has never existed before.
There's, I think, only been a few defense tech companies that have gotten to program of record status, and we talked a lot about that at board meetings and stuff like that. And I've heard some founders say, you know what, that like doesn't actually matter that much. Like just go and find the money wherever you can get it. And then there's others who are like, no, that if you want to build a really large business, like that's super important. It's a lot more sticky. Can you guys maybe just talk about what it means to become a program of record and what are the like very difficult steps that it takes to get there, especially for maybe earlier stage founders in the space or engineers that are trying to better understand kind of like what makes a company very special in this market and how you get to like hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue, like what it takes to get there and what you've learned about that process?
Yeah, I can start. So just on a technical level, what is a program of record? It means that Congress has defined it in the budget, and that's aligned to like a set of capabilities that a company like ours is building. That's what a program of record is. How to get there. So we also believe what you described, that to be a large public defense company, you need to be capable of winning multiple programs of record, very large ones that are really important to the national security community and the Defense Department. There are three groups that you're bringing together around that new program that you're trying to build. The first is the mission groups. These are the folks that Brett described that we try and get as close as possible to out forward. These are like operational commanders that actually own operational missions, and they have unmet needs. They're trying to compete with China or Russia in a certain contested place overseas, and they need things. That group is the first group we kind of solve for. There's a second group, which is the senior decision makers in the Defense Department. They're the ones that are thinking really long term. How do we take the capabilities that someone needs out in the field and think about how those align to the big priorities? So when we talked earlier about we want to be building around a top 3 national security problem, that's in one of these senior decision makers' top 3. So you can think of, Admiral Paparo out in Hawaii, who owns all the forces in the Pacific. One of his top 3 problems is deterrence. How do we compete with the PRC and deter them from armed conflict? That's kind of a top 3 problem we'd build a program around. And then the third group of people are these program managers. They're civilian PMs that exist on, bases around the US. And they have this really hard job, very valuable for the DoD, which is take what the mission users say they need, what the senior leaders say, is in their top priorities and therefore in their budget that Congress is going to approve, and actually turn that into a program. That becomes the program of record. And the challenge is like all 3 of these people are motivated by the same thing ultimately, right? Like delivering for the mission, but they're very different personalities and they exist in 3 different places. And you have to stitch them together to create a new program. And so that's what we spend a ton of our time doing, is winning for both, for all 3 of them, and then making sure that they're all building around a common vision. Building programs of record is so hard in the DoD, but it is really about those 3 groups coming together around a big vision and a big budget.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of time, right? I mean, many years to make these types of programs happen.
Yes, typically, the fastest would be in the 2 to 3 year time frame, because that's how the DoD plans their budget. So this year they're planning their budget for 2027 and 2028, and thinking about how the programs that they want to stand up in that year. And so we as a company are working with those 3 groups that I just described to shape programs that would come into existence starting in 27 or 28.
Yep. Maybe just a little bit of help or advice to other founders building in the defense tech space. I mean, you guys, there's still a lot of journey left in the Vannevar story, but you guys are, at least it feels like you're on the right path. What challenges do you think other defense startups might start to face in the next few years? And based on what you've learned about how to navigate some of them, like what advice would you give to avoid some of the pitfalls that they might get into?
In terms of this idea of building toward a program of record, something that we've learned is, it's amazing if you're building great capability for users, but if you don't have those senior sponsors and you don't have the program office on board, you're not going to build a program. And the reverse is true. You can have senior sponsors and you can have the program office on board, but if you're not building something that matters, that really matters in a top 3 way, you're also not going to build a program. And that sounds very simple, but like a ton of just cycles at Vannevar and getting punched to the face went into learning those 2 truths. And I think because you take so many punches to the face in building a defense company, I'd also just say, like, build around something that's both a big, hard problem and something that's deeply meaningful to you, because otherwise it's going to be really hard to get through all the gauntlet that I just described. And that's certainly, that's very true for us at Vannevar, right? Like, big, hard problem, and it's personally meaningful for a lot of people on the team and motivational for engineers that are coming to join us. But yeah, go ahead, Brett, on your take here.
I would say, like, the failure modes that I've seen are most common for defense companies. First failure mode that I see is like really technical folks that are focused on the technology, not actually on solving a mission problem. This was like very common in the 2016 to 2022 phase. So there's a lot of sort of tech companies that are defense had big budgets, were sort of tech forward, not mission problem forward, or even defense only companies that thought this way and have since failed. So I think that's like a pretty common failure mode. Typically those teams are more like founding teams are engineering heavy. The second failure mode is what Nini described, which is you're building like a great problem that solves a mission problem, but you're spending nearly enough time on the go-to-market in business development side, and you kind of with there, you need to be spending as much time as you are on the product side trying to figure out and iterate on the sales motion. That's a very common failure mode. And then the third problem, which is what I see former DoD people run into sometimes, is like focusing all their effort on the program office and requirements and none of their effort on like building a thing that actually works and solves a mission problem. I think those are kind of the 3 failure modes. It's really hard to do a defense company. You just have to kind of know that like all of it's going to be hard. Like the go-to-market is going to be hard and the product stuff is going to be hard. And you have to be sort of iterating, like thinking iteratively on both of those.
Yeah. I think it's always impressive to me how you guys are always thinking super long term. Like a lot of our conversations are around what we need to do today in 2024 that will make an impact in 2028. And I'm always like, oh my gosh, this is some definitely long-term planning. How do we structure the organization? What products do we need to work on? Who do we need to get closer to? And so the fact that you guys are profitable and have that runway to think long-term, I think is also a major asset for you, right? I think for a lot of companies in this space, making sure you're managing your capital in the right way to give you the opportunity to think long-term is crucial. So that's another thing I'd say. But thank you guys for so many things. One, thank you for your time doing this session with us. Thank you for letting me and Felicis be a small part of your journey. Thank you for, helping share some of the wisdom that you've learned over the years to a lot of people that are either on this path already or going to be on this path. I think it's super valuable. And then thank you for all that you do to, help these various missions that are helping our country. So really appreciate your time, and thanks again.